You'd think South Korea was a picture-perfect place, what with its strict gun laws and all, but underneath the surface, a lot of folks were just at their wits' end. The pressure to get ahead was insane, and it was pushing people to their absolute breaking point. One of those people was Yu Jung-tae, a young fella who was really in a tight spot trying to nail the civil service exam. He was a good guy, a real stickler for the rules, but he'd been carrying a massive chip on his shoulder for years, constantly being put down for not having a job. His life was a constant loop of studying his brains out and getting nothing but rejection letters. Things finally hit a breaking point one day when he was late for his prep class. His teacher, a real piece of work, just ripped into him in front of the whole room. In that moment, a violent thought just flashed in Jung-tae's head. He pictured himself pulling a rifle on the guy, but it was just a flash in the pan. Deep down, he wanted to kill the people who looked down on him, but he was able to keep his dark thoughts in check, thanks to a few sessions with a psychologist. Turns out Jung-tae had a bit of a screw loose and could easily fly off the handle whenever he felt cornered. The psychologist told him that everyone had a trigger inside them, and it was a choice to pull it. Unfortunately for Jung-tae, the tiny, cheap room he was renting made it impossible to get any peace and quiet, and the stress of his upcoming exam was getting to him something fierce. Across town, there was this dedicated cop named Lee Do, who was a real straight shooter, trying his best to keep the peace. He'd been a military sniper in a past life, but he left all that behind to be on the beat. Somewhere else, a detective named Seo Hyung-ju caught a real head-scratcher of a case. This guy, an acquaintance of a big-time arms dealer, had died in his apartment. Everyone thought it was a suicide at first, but things got real shady when they found a hidden stash of ammunition. Korea's gun laws were no joke, and most cops didn't even carry sidearms, so this was a huge deal. The detective called up Lee Do, knowing his background. Lee Do, after checking out the scene, had a hunch about the apartment's ceiling. A quick look proved him right. The ceiling was stuffed with hundreds of rounds of ammo. That night, Lee Do had dinner with Captain Ju, who was his superior, and the man who'd raised him. Lee Do had been orphaned at age 6 when his whole family was murdered in a robbery. As a little kid, he tried to grab a gun to shoot the killer, but Captain Ju stopped him, and from that day on, he took Lee Do in and raised him. Lee Do grew up with Captain Ju's daughter, who thought of him as her own big brother. Over dinner, Lee Do brought up this crazy case, but Captain Ju just told him to hold his horses and wait for more clues. But what they didn't know was that a new player had just arrived in the country. A terminally ill arms dealer named Moon Baek, who had this whole elaborate revenge plot cooked up against a country he felt had done him wrong. After getting back to his apartment, Lee Do couldn't get the ammunition he found out of his head. For some reason, that ammo was a ghost from his past, dredging up old trauma from his time in the military. It wasn't clear exactly what had happened to make him quit, but it was clear that it still haunted him. The next day, he and his partner, Jung-woo, were out on patrol. While driving, Jung-woo spotted a woman blocking the entrance to a company's office building. Jung-woo, a bit by the book, told her to move along, but Lee Do stepped in. It turned out he knew the woman, whom he called Kyung-suk. He explained to Jung-woo that she had been protesting there for a year, demanding an apology from the company's director. Her son had been worked to death, and the company had basically washed its hands of the whole thing. Lee Do told Jung-woo to give her a break. It wasn't a major crime, just a heartbroken mother looking for a little justice. Elsewhere, a woman from the water utility was trying to do her job at a customer's house, but something was off about the guy who lived there. Lee Suk, the guy's name, had a wild look in his eyes, like a predator on the hunt, and she was rightly nervous. After fixing the plumbing, she noticed a telltale electronic anklet on Lee Suk's leg, a bracelet that marked him as a former violent offender. Petrified, she tried to get the heck out of there, but he deliberately blocked the door. Just in the nick of time, Lee Do and Jung-woo arrived, having been alerted to an unstable signal from the man's anklet. They got the woman out safely and checked on Lee Suk, who bristled at their presence. Jung-woo gave him a stern warning, telling him to straighten up because no matter what he did, the bracelet would always give him away. But as he spoke, Lee Suk grabbed a sharp object, ready to stab Jung-woo in the back. Lee Do saw it coming and stepped in, saving his partner. Feeling humiliated, Lee Suk glared at Lee Do, promising to get his revenge. He ranted that ever since he got that ankle bracelet, people had treated him like dirt, just like his own mother had before she left him. Meanwhile, Jung-tae was truly at his wits' end. The constant noise and disrespect from the other tenants in his cramped, thin-walled boarding house had him on a short fuse. One night, his neighbor and his girlfriend decided to get a little too comfortable in the room next to his, and the sounds were so loud that Jongtae couldn't focus on studying for his exam. When he tried to talk to them about it, they just blew him off. His patience, which had been stretched paper thin, finally snapped. This time, it wasn't an imaginary rifle he was holding. It was real. He took the gun and killed both of them. Then, in a fit of rage, he went on a rampage, shooting up the whole building. Around the same time, Lee Do and Jong-woo got a report about the shooting and were dispatched to the scene. Lee Do, with his military training kicking in, took charge. He cut the power to the building, plunging it into darkness, and drew Jongtae out. It all came to a head, and in the end, Jongtae went down at Lee Do's hands. The chaotic scene went viral, and the neighborhood was abuzz with talk about the shooting. Because this shooting wasn't their run-of-the-mill case, Police Commander Yoon assigned Hyung-ju to get to the bottom of it. But Hyung-ju, knowing he was out of his depth, suggested they call in the big guns Lee Do. Without wasting any time, Lee Do took control of the case and secured the rifles from Jongtae's boarding house. With the skill of a true professional, he reassembled the disassembled weapons. He explained that all 4 rifles they found were the real deal, and that 2 of them were high-end assault rifles usually reserved for special ops. Lee Do quickly figured out that this case was linked to the loose ammo they'd found earlier. It was a clear sign that someone was sneaking illegal weapons into South Korea, a country where guns were practically unheard of. While the police were trying to make heads or tails of the case, a gangster named Suk-ho was busy pulling a fast one on his own boss. He had his crew corner their leader Kim and demanded he hand over all of his shady businesses. After getting what he wanted, he had his men brutally beat Kim and his loyal followers, leaving them for dead. Then, a cleanup crew was called in to get rid of the bodies. The crew was led by a gangster named Jong-man, a low-ranking grunt who was constantly getting disrespected by the bosses, a fact that ate away at him, even if he didn't show it. But he figured it wouldn't be for long, as Suk-ho had promised him a big promotion for helping out with the coup. As Jong-man and his crew were about to bury the bodies, they heard a muffled sound from inside one of the bags. It turned out that Kim was still alive, and he pleaded with Jong-man to save him. He warned him that Suk-ho was a two-faced weasel and would never make good on his promise. He even tried to sweeten the deal, offering Jong-man an entire truckload of illegal firearms he'd just received if he would help him. But Jong-man, still a loyal soldier, didn't want to hear it. He left Kim for dead. Back at headquarters, Jong-man reported back to Suk-ho and eagerly reminded him of the promised promotion to a nightclub manager. But Kim was right. Suk-ho was a backstabber, and he just laughed, telling Jong-man he wasn't cut out for the good life. That insult was the final straw for Jong-man. Feeling humiliated, he and his loyal crew hatched a plan to get their revenge. They decided to get their hands on the gun shipment Kim had mentioned, figuring if they could control the weapons, they could control the whole alliance of gangs. At first, his men were hesitant. They didn't want to get mixed up with illegal firearms. But Jong-man insisted he was tired of being a punching bag. As it turned out, before he died, Kim had been approached by a shadowy organization at a shipyard, a faceless group who wanted to work with him to flood Korea with guns. Days later, Lee Do found himself in a tense interrogation room with Jong-tae, the young man who had gone on a rampage. Jong-tae claimed the gun he used came from a mysterious package, insisting that many others had received similar packages, but he refused to give up any more information. He told Lee Do that the police got paid with the public's money, so they should earn it. If what Jong-tae said was true, it would mean the floodgates for illegal weapons had been opened, turning South Korea's once safe streets into a hotbed of chaos. But Hyung-ju and her superior dismissed the claim, chalking it up to the delusions of a mentally unstable man. They just couldn't wrap their heads around the idea of guns being so easily available. Meanwhile, another dire situation was brewing at a high school where bullying was a daily nightmare. 2 students, Gyujin and Young Dong, were routinely shaken down and used as lackeys by a vicious bully named Song Jun. For them, school wasn't a place of learning, but a living hell where no one seemed to care or notice their suffering. Gyujin, at his wit's end, had contemplated suicide more than once, but the thought of leaving his loving mother behind kept him grounded. So he just gritted his teeth and endured the daily torment. Somewhere else, Lee Suk was out on a quick errand at a convenience store. He had his face covered with a mask and a hoodie, but it wasn't enough to hide his identity. He overheard a couple of women gossiping about him. their voices laced with disgust over his past crime and the electronic anklet he feeling his dignity stomped on, he lost his temper and stormed out. When he got back to his place, he noticed a package on his doorstep, a package that was meant for his mother, who had long since vanished. He opened it, and to his astonishment, found a rifle inside. A big, wicked smile spread across his face. With this, he could finally get revenge on everyone who had ever belittled him. Having done his mandatory military service, he was no stranger to a firearm, and he took the gun to a nearby hillside to test it out. That night, Lee Do, who had been investigating the package box from Jong Tai, suddenly had a flash of inspiration. He remembered seeing a similar box on Lee Suk's porch. A cold dread washed over him, and he frantically called Hyung-ju to track the man's anklet. But it was too late. The man had managed to pry the anklet off, and the signal went dead. Lee Do raced to the man's house, where he found a strange man who looked a little too well dressed for a burglar. He was about to lay into him, but the man calmly introduced himself as Moon Bak and claimed he was just investigating the package himself because he had received a similar one, though his only contained bullets. He handed Lee Do a slip of paper with a list of addresses, claiming they were the other recipients. Lee Do was wary of Moon Bak's shifty demeanor, but had no time to question him. His suspicions were proven right when Yongman's subordinate showed up, a gangster who was also on the hunt for the packages. Lee Do and Moon Bak gave chase, catching the gangster after a short pursuit. Lee Do was baffled by the gangster who suddenly showed up and why Moon Bak helped him catch the gangster. He quickly cuffed the gangster and called the station to come pick him up. The CCTV monitoring center soon called, informing him that Lee Suk had been spotted with a large bag, likely containing the rifle. With no time to waste, Moon Bak offered Lee Do a ride in his car, and Lee Do, against his better judgment, had no choice but to accept. As they sped toward Lee Suk's last known location, Moon Bak calmly told Lee Do he was ready to help. He claimed he was just too curious about the whole gun smuggling operation to sit it out. Lee Do didn't bother to reply, simply telling him to keep his eyes on the road. They then received another clue. Noticing Lee Suk had somehow vanished from the surveillance, the sheer cold went down their spine as they realized that the man was probably heading to the police station. All the while, Lee Suk was indeed making his way to the police station. It was clear he had a bone to pick with the people who had put him away. When Lee Do finally reached the station, he acted fast. He cuffed Moon Bak to the car door and ran inside, ordering his superior to evacuate the roughly 30 officers inside. Meanwhile, Lee Suk had already made his way in and started a chaotic massacre. By the time Lee Do got inside, 3 officers were already dead. He yelled for everyone to get out while he himself made a beeline for the evidence room to grab the rifle from Jong Tai's case. Unfortunately, Lee Do's boss, Commander Yoon, got hit in the chaos, leaving him stranded and bleeding. Out of ammo, Lee Do was forced to run back to the car to grab the bullets from Moon Bak's trunk, knowing they'd fit the rifle he was holding. From inside the car, Moon Bak watched Lee Do, his curiosity getting the better of him. He used a key he had hidden to quietly free himself from the handcuffs. A nosy reporter, smelling a big scoop, was also outside the station. Moon Bak, ever the manipulator, struck up a deal with the journalist to go inside and film the action. Meanwhile, a full-blown gunfight was underway inside the station. Lee Do, a former Special Forces sniper, was a weapon himself. He easily managed to get the upper hand on Lee Suk, putting him down with a well-placed shot. But Lee Suk wasn't out of tricks yet. He grabbed the wounded Commander Yoon and held him hostage, threatening to kill him unless he was let go. Lee Do was in a tough spot. He had to choose between letting his superior die and breaking a solemn promise he'd made to himself. He flashed back to his time as a sniper, where he was forced to kill a civilian in Iraq. He had sworn on his life that he would never take another life again. But here and now, there was no other choice. He had to kill Lafari Suk with the rifle. The whole thing was filmed by the journalist, who, hungry for a viral story, posted the video immediately. Lee Do's face was all over the news, and the video reached the eyes of Gyu Jin, the bullied high school student. Seeing a man solve his problems with a gun, a dangerous idea took hold in Gyu Jin's head. The only way to stop his bully, Song Jun, was to shoot him. He even started looking up how to buy a gun online. Later, while Lee Do was being grilled by police internal affairs for the shooting, Moon Bak was also being questioned by Hyung-ju. He played it cool, telling Hyung-ju that he was just a good Samaritan who was trying to help Lee Do. But the police's internal affairs wasn't so nice to Lee Do. They accused him of being a psychopath who was just looking for an excuse to kill, but Commander Yoon, now recovering, came to his defense. He insisted that Lee Do had done the right thing, and he made it clear that Internal Affairs had better back off. After Lee Do was let go by Internal Affairs, Captain Ju was there to pick him up. As a father figure, Captain Ju knew all too well the pain Lee Do carried because of guns. Lee Do had left the military for a reason: he never wanted to kill again. That's why he joined the patrol division, a job that didn't require him to carry a weapon. But now, here he was, dragged back into the brutal world he had sworn to leave behind. The next day, Jung-woo reported a failure. The gangster from Jong-man's crew who had been caught at Lee Suk's house had somehow slipped his bonds and disappeared. Lee Do, fed up with the setbacks, told Jung-woo he'd handle it himself. He tasked Jung-woo with digging into Moonbaek's shady background while he went straight to the heart of the matter: the gangster clubhouse of Suk-ho. Going in alone, Lee Do wasn't backing down. He marched right up to Suk-ho and showed him a photo of the missing gangster. Suk-ho claimed he had no idea who the man was, saying he only ever dealt with Jong-man. He swore he knew nothing about the gun shipments. Lee Do didn't buy it for a second and warned Suk-ho that he'd tear the whole organization down if he was lying. Meanwhile, Jung-woo came through with some key intel. Moonbaek wasn't just some regular guy. He was the former manager of a major corporation that manufactured parts for firearms. Jung-woo also found a fancy apartment complex address for Moonbaek, a far cry from the scruffy persona he had tried to project. Lee Do's suspicions went through the roof. On the other side of town, Jong-man was holding a meeting. To everyone's shock, Kim was there, alive and well. Jong-man had saved him, and now they had a common goal: to take down Suk-ho. Kim told the crew they needed to find his phone, which Suk-ho had taken because it had all the info about the gun smuggling operation. Getting that phone was their one shot at bringing Suk-ho to his knees. At the same time, the grieving mother, Kyung-suk, still deep in denial, was cooking a meal for her long-dead son, finding comfort in the routine. After that, she went to her usual spot in front of the company to demand an apology, only to be chased off once again. Meanwhile, the bullying at the high school was getting worse by the minute. Gyu-jin couldn't even eat his lunch because Song-joon dumped a bowl of vegetable stew on his head. His friend Young-dong was still being treated like a slave, and it was pushing Gyu-jin's anger to a boiling point. The very next day, it was as if fate had answered his prayers. A mysterious package arrived, and inside, to his absolute glee, was a rifle. A wicked smile spread across his face. He knew his life was about to change for good. Later that night, Lee Do met Moonbaek at a small restaurant. He wasted no time getting to the point, asking him if he had worked for the firearms company. Cool as a cucumber, Moonbaek confessed that he had, but claimed he quit after being diagnosed with terminal cancer. He said he only had 6 months left to live. He spun a yarn about getting a mysterious link on a messaging app, and a few days later, a package containing bullets showed up at his door. Lee Do, despite his gut telling him something was off, couldn't help but feel a pang of pity for Moonbaek, who was so composed and nonchalant even though he was staring down the barrel of a terminal illness. During their conversation, Moonbaek handed Lee Do a piece of paper. It was one of the addresses he had found in the package box. It was, he suspected, the address of another gun recipient. A cold chill ran down Lee Do's spine. It was the address of Kyung-suk. Without a second thought, he left Moonbaek and raced to her location, but it was already too late. Kyung-suk had already gotten the rifle and was now standing in front of the director's car demanding an apology. Through her tear-filled eyes, she pleaded with him to acknowledge what he had done. But the director's only response was to order his driver to hit her. Kyung-suk's sorrow turned to rage, and she fired her gun. It was a twisted scene. The director had never even known her son's name, and now he was begging for his life. With a gun pointed at his head, he finally offered an apology, but it wasn't enough. Kyung-suk, having finally found a way to make him face his crime, pulled the trigger. After Kyung-suk's act of revenge, a strange sense of calm washed over her. She called Lee Do, confessed to the murder, and said she would turn herself in after a final prayer for her son. As she waited at home, a knock came at the door. She thought it was Lee Do, but to her horror, it was Jong-man's men. When Lee Do arrived, he spotted a car belonging to Jong-man's crew. He told Moonbaek to keep an eye on things outside while he went in. Lee Do knew right away that something was wrong. He called out to them, drawing them out into the open. Alone and unarmed, he was facing off against a dozen gangsters, including Yutai, who were all carrying guns. At first, they were cocky, but their overconfidence was a mistake. With blinding speed, Lee Do disarmed one of them and took his gun, emptied the magazine, and began beating them. The gangsters had no idea they were messing with the baddest former Special Forces soldier in Korea. Lee Do taught them a lesson they wouldn't soon forget, taking them all down. He then opened a suspiciously ajar closet door and found Kyung-suk inside, bleeding from a gunshot wound to the stomach. Lee Do saw red. As Lee Do pummeled the gangsters inside, Moon-bak, who had been watching outside, came in to help, showing a surprising knack for fighting himself. This terminally ill man who had seemed so frail and weak was a total whirlwind. With dozens of gangsters now lying in a heap, Lee Do begged Moon-bak to drive Kyung-suk to the hospital. He knew she wouldn't make it if they wasted another minute. At the hospital, as Kyung-suk was in surgery, Lee Do couldn't shake her from his mind. She was just a woman who wanted justice for her son. A woman who was always so kind, yet no one ever showed her that same kindness in return. Enraged, Lee Do went to Suk-ho's clubhouse, assuming he was the one who ordered the hit. Suk-ho wasn't there, so Lee Do just took out his anger on his lackeys. After Lee Do's one-man demolition job, Suk-ho was furious, but also terrified of Lee Do's skills. His right-hand man told him that the whole mess was Jong-man's doing. Whatever Jong-man was planning, Suk-ho wasn't going to let it happen. Later, Lee Do and Hyung-ju went back to Kyung-suk's house to investigate. There, they found a list of addresses of the gun recipients. They quickly realized that the addresses all came from the mysterious website Moon-bak had mentioned. The gun traffickers had planted a virus and a tracker on the site. Lee Do came to a chilling conclusion. The traffickers weren't just sending guns to random people. They were specifically targeting society's most desperate. The depressed like Kyung-suk, the ostracized like Lee-suk, and the victims of injustice. It was clear that someone wanted to use these people to create chaos and turn South Korea into a gun-filled powder keg. The next night, Lee Do found Moon-bak still at the hospital, watching over Kyung-suk. Lee Do, his curiosity piqued, asked why Moon-bak was helping him. Moon-bak gave him a story that tugged at his heartstrings, claiming he wanted to do some good before he died. He said he understood suffering better than most because his own life had been a living hell since he was a baby. He was abandoned by his mother, only to be scooped up by a gang of organ traffickers. By the time he was 5, they'd taken his left eye to sell it, and the one he had now was a transplant. When he was 10, they sold him to traffickers in America, where more of his organs were taken. But then, the FBI raided the place, and he was rescued. Lee Do felt a wave of sympathy wash over him. It was a sobering thought that someone else had a life even tougher than his. Back at school, Gyujin was trying his best to keep his cool. He was itching to kill Song-joon for all the bullying, but since he hadn't done his mandatory military service yet, he had no idea how to use a rifle. He was just biding his time, waiting for the right moment. But Song-joon wouldn't let up. The bully grabbed a razor and sliced Gyujin's back, a moment that sent Gyujin flying into a fit of uncontrolled rage. That same night, Jongman, wearing a mask, sneaked into the hospital. He was out for revenge against Lee Do, who had left dozens of his men beaten and bruised. He found Lee Do in an elevator and was about to get the drop on him, but Moon-bak stepped in, blocking him just in time. The confrontation was tense, but the gangster had no choice but to back off. After the coast was clear, Moon-bak and Lee Do went their separate ways. But as Moon-bak walked away, a group of foreign men came to him, and a sinister truth was revealed. The man who had been by Lee Do's side all this time was the puppet master behind all the chaos. Moon-bak was the one sending the guns to society's most desperate. It wasn't just a handful of guns either. His organization had sent an entire truckload of rifles to Kim's crew, but the coup had thrown a wrench in his plans, and Lee Do was proving to be a serious thorn in his side. While he was trying to figure out his next move, one of his men couldn't keep his mouth shut, blabbering on and on. Moon-bak, with a cold, dead look in his eyes, walked up to the guy and shot him dead without a second thought. The film took a flashback to 20 years ago, a time when Moon-bak was a kid in America. Gun trafficking was rampant, and he, a young boy raised by gangsters, was no stranger to a firearm. After finding and butchering the gangsters who had stolen his organs, he was approached by an arms dealer named Jake. Jake was so impressed by a kid who could take down an entire gang that he adopted him. As a gift, he gave Moon-bak a glass eye to replace the one that had been stolen. It was a fake with a blue iris, earning him the nickname Blue Brown. Jake then trained him to be a ruthless killer and arms trafficker. Years later, as an adult, Moon-bak asked Jake for permission to start giving out guns for free. His stated goal was to create chaos and make gun ownership legal, so Jake could sell his weapons legally. But Moonbaek's real motive was revenge against the country that had abandoned him. Back in the present, Sukho summoned Jongman to his clubhouse. Sukho, seeing right through his betrayal, slapped him, but Jongman swore up and down that he was still loyal. Sukho pretended to buy it, but the second Jongman was out of sight, he started making a plan to get rid of him for good. The next day at school, the bullying continued. Songjun was still tormenting Gyujin during lunch, but Gyujin wasn't scared anymore. He was just biding his time, waiting for the perfect moment to take out his bully. Meanwhile, Moonbaek's subordinates suggested they just kill Lee Do to get him out of the picture. But Moonbaek, the puppet master that he was, wanted the cop to stay alive. He was still enjoying playing his little game with him. Soon after, Moonbaek went to a public area where Gyujin and Youngdong were eating. He had a plan to push Gyujin's hand and get him to use the rifle he had been sent. Youngdong, feeling guilty, apologized to Gyujin for hitting him, explaining that Songjun had forced him to do it. While they were talking, Moonbaek's men, acting on his orders, started a brawl between rival gangs nearby. Gyujin and everyone else were shocked as the thugs started beating each other to a pulp. Then, as the chaos reached a fever pitch, Moonbaek pulled out an airsoft gun and took down the thugs. Gyujin was completely awestruck. He now truly believed that a gun was the only way to help people, and that killing Songjun would save everyone from a living hell. With that, he begged Moonbaek to teach him how to shoot. Moonbaek, having gotten exactly what he wanted, happily agreed, even extending the lesson to Youngdong, who was just as much a victim. A short while later, Moonbaek called Sukho, tipping him off about the guns that Kim had hidden away. Sukho was blindsided by the news. Moonbaek told him to beat Jongman to the punch and distribute the weapons himself before Jongman could get to them. While he waited for Sukho to make his move, Moonbaek and his crew went back to work. He used unsuspecting elderly couriers to deliver new packages of recently exported guns, ensuring the couriers had no idea what they were carrying. Meanwhile, Gyujin had finally hit his breaking point. He packed his new rifle and a backpack full of ammo, giving his mother a final hug before leaving for school. He knew today was the day he would end it all. As Gyujin was on his way, Moonbaek met Lee Do, who was still in the dark about Moonbaek's true identity. Moonbaek handed him a piece of paper with a list of gun recipients, including Gyujin's name and address. Knowing he was out of time, Lee Do immediately called for backup. He also called the school, warning the principal that a student was on campus with a firearm. As a chilling final move, Moonbaek's people had locked all the doors and removed the keys, trapping everyone inside a school that was about to turn into a war zone. Just as Gyujin was ready to go on a rampage, a teacher called him into the office. And in a twist of fate, Songjun's sidekick grabbed Gyujin's bag, finding the rifle. Gyujin, of course, panicked. He was back to being a victim, powerless to stop the bullying. But then, a gunshot rang out from a nearby classroom, and Songjun and his crew froze in terror. It wasn't Gyujin. It was his friend, Youngdong. He had received a gun package of his own and was now a shooter with a vengeance, ready to kill everyone in the school. As the school turned into a bloody mess, Youngdong handed Gyujin a revolver and told him it was time to get some payback. He reasoned that since no one, not even the teachers, had ever helped them, there was no reason to spare them. But Gyujin was hesitant. Youngdong didn't wait for him to decide, continuing his rampage as students and teachers ran for their lives. Just as the chaos hit its peak, Lee Do and Moonbaek arrived to evacuate the students, with dozens still trapped inside the library. They quickly set up a blockade and hid in the library, where the terrified students cowered. The fear in Songjun's eyes was crystal clear. He had never imagined that the kids he bullied would ever be this brutal. Youngdong, meanwhile, had found the library. He offered to let the students go if they handed over Songjun and his crew. Songjun, in a panic, threatened the other students to keep their mouths shut, while the teacher tried to talk Youngdong down. But Youngdong just screamed that it was too late. He had begged the teachers for help over and over again, but no one had cared. With that, he shot the teacher. With no options left, the other students ran, leaving Songjun to face his fate. Just as Youngdong was about to kill him, Lee Do stepped in, begging him to stop. But then Gyujin arrived, and with a gun in his hand, he pointed it at Songjun. It was a final push from Moonbaek, who had told him that this was the only way to get justice. Gyujin's hand was shaking. He desperately wanted to pull the trigger, but he was terrified of disappointing his mother. Lee Do saw the inner conflict and pleaded with him to drop the gun, telling him that revenge would only lead to more pain. Tears streamed down Gyujin's face, and he slowly lowered his weapon. In the end, he couldn't do it. Gyujin and Youngdong were arrested, but as they were being led away, Gyujin realized a bitter truth. He and Youngdong, the victims, were being treated like criminals, while Songjun, the bully, was being treated as a victim. His mother, watching from a distance, could only weep for her son's shattered life. In the aftermath, Lee Do finally realized who the real monster was. He and Jong-woo had been putting all the pieces together, and all the clues pointed to Moon Baek. But when the police were ready to make their move, Moon Baek vanished. Lee Do went to Moon Baek's luxury apartment, only to find it empty, with a new package addressed to him sitting in the middle of the room. Inside was a rifle, Moon Baek's final gift, and a chilling signal that their war was just beginning. The aftermath of the school shooting was chaos. With tens of thousands of illegal guns now on the streets, Korea was no longer the safe country it once was. Both the police and the public were on edge. Even the criminal underworld was shaken up. The gang leaders called an emergency meeting, but only Suk-ho knew the real source of the guns, and he kept it to himself. He had a new plan. He would hand over his weapons to Lee Do and blame the entire mess on Jongman. He knew the government was looking for a scapegoat, and he intended to give them one. He arranged a meeting with Lee Do and did exactly that, claiming that everything was Kim's and Jongman's fault. Meanwhile, at police headquarters, the police commissioner had received a direct order from the president to form a joint task force, bringing together intelligence, the military, and the police. If they failed, the president was ready to declare martial law, a move that could turn South Korea into something resembling its totalitarian neighbor to the north. At the same time, Captain Ju was growing frantic because he hadn't heard from his daughter in days. What he didn't know was that she had been scammed by a group of real estate fraudsters who had used the chaos of the gun violence as a smokescreen. She had lost her life savings and the pension money her father had given her, so she could buy a house and be independent. Now, that money was gone, leaving her heartbroken and ridden with guilt. On the other side of town, Jongman and Kim had been quietly collecting guns from the other recipients, but they were biding their time, waiting for the perfect moment to make their move on Suk-ho. The game of cat and mouse was in full swing when Suk-ho approached Jongman, offering a truce and a chance to work together. It was, of course, a lie. Suk-ho was working with Lee Do, and he wanted Jongman to get him Kim's fingers to get into his phone, which held all the information about the gun business. But Jongman wasn't born yesterday. He knew Suk-ho was a backstabbing weasel, so he and Kim hatched a counterplan. The next day, Jongman and his men went to a remote location and pretended to dig a grave, knowing that Suk-ho's men and the police were watching them. After the ruse, they went to a sauna, a known hangout for Suk-ho's gang. They were told to leave and bring Kim's fingers as soon as possible. Back at his clubhouse, Suk-ho was waiting with his gun ready to kill Jongman and hand him over to the police. But to his shock, it wasn't Jongman who showed up. It was Kim, a man he thought he had buried for good. Suk-ho was blindsided, but he didn't have much time to process it because a shootout immediately broke out. Meanwhile, Jongman and his men were at the sauna, where they killed every single one of Suk-ho's men. They then plundered all the money and valuables from the clubhouse, and in an instant, Jongman became the boss of the biggest gang in Korea. He handed out the money to his men, a reward for their loyalty and hard work. But his reign wouldn't last for long, because the police task force was already on their way to raid the clubhouse. When Hyungju and the SWAT team finally broke in, both Suk-ho and Kim were dead. But Jongman was the victor, and now he was the king. The police were on his trail, and the final showdown was about to begin. As the gunfight raged, Lee Do grabbed a sniper rifle and went on the hunt for Jongman. Jongman managed to escape in a car, but Lee Do wasn't about to let him get away. He climbed to the rooftop of a nearby building, and with a single expert shot from very far away, he took out the car's tire. Jongman was captured, and Lee Do had put an end to the gang war. But with Jongman's arrest, Moon Baek's plan was thrown into chaos. Moon Baek had been counting on the gang war to distract the police and Lee Do. His own boss, Jake, was pressuring him. If the mission failed, his business could be exposed to the CIA and FBI. He had to find a new way to get the guns out into the world. During all the chaos, Captain Ju received the worst news of his life. His daughter was dead. She had taken her own life, unable to cope with the shame of being scammed out of all her savings. Captain Ju had given her his life's pension money so she could finally buy a house and start over, and now it was all gone. Seeing his daughter's lifeless body, Captain Ju broke down in tears. Li Do, consumed by the case, had no idea his mentor was in so much pain. That night, he went to his old military superior, begging for weapons and intel to track down Moonback. He and the intelligence agents were now fully aware of Moonback's criminal history and his sprawling organization. But Moonback was always one step ahead. He had hired the same journalist who had filmed Li Do's shooting and offered him a huge sum of money to film every single new shooting that broke out. Then, he hacked every internet connection in the country, broadcasting a chilling message. Korea was now his. He ended the broadcast with a final, taunting message to Li Do, telling him that a gun had been sent to Captain Ju. Li Do immediately panicked, dispatching officers to find Moonback while he rushed to Captain Ju's home. But it was already too late. Captain Ju had found the scammers who had ruined his daughter's life. He was met with laughter as they saw him as a lone cop with no backup. But their bravado quickly faded when Captain Ju pulled out a gun and shot one of them. In that moment, as they faced death, their cockiness turned to sheer terror. From a distance, Moonback's journalist filmed the whole thing, broadcasting the violent act live to the entire country. Just as Captain Ju was about to kill the last scammer, Li Do burst onto the scene, pleading with his mentor to stop. Li Do, his own voice cracking with emotion, reminded Captain Ju that he had lost a daughter, but he had also lost a son, his own foster son. He reminded Captain Ju of his own words from years ago when he told a young Li Do not to seek revenge. Now, the man who had taught him that lesson was about to break his own rule. Captain Ju, unable to ignore Li Do's words, broke down in tears. He had no idea how to get justice for his daughter, and it was tearing him apart. Moonback, furious that Li Do had talked Captain Ju out of pulling the trigger, finally came out of the shadows. With a sniper rifle in hand, he opened fire, raining bullets down on Li Do and Captain Ju. The ambush was brutal. Li Do was hit multiple times, and Captain Ju, shielding his foster son, took a fatal shot. Seeing his father figure fall, a wave of rage washed over Li Do, and he tried to get up and fight back. But he was too badly wounded and was shot down again, leaving him paralyzed and helpless as he watched Captain Ju take his last breath. Moonback, the architect of this tragedy, left him there to bleed, wanting him to see the world he was creating, a world where everyone armed with a gun could mete out their own brand of justice. He then broadcast a chilling message, promising to send even more guns out, this time even to children. From that day on, guns became a normal part of life in South Korea. People walked around with firearms, and YouTubers started making gun unboxing videos. The country devolved into utter chaos, with shootings becoming an almost daily occurrence. The government, desperate, was ready to declare martial law, but even the public was fractured, with one group demanding a gun ban and another demanding full legalization. In the midst of all this, Moonback made his next power play. He went to a secret meeting of the gang bosses and shot one of them, a chilling display of his power. He then threw a single pistol on the table and told them he only needed one of them to run the show. The rest would be killed. The terrified gang leaders fought over the gun, and when a new boss emerged, Moonback ordered his men to slaughter the rest of them. A week later, Li Do finally woke up from his coma. Just as Moonback had promised, the world was a completely different place. With his foster father and foster sister both gone, Li Do was left with nothing but a desire for revenge. After arranging a funeral for them, he got a call from his intelligence contacts. They had found out that thousands of people were protesting in front of the National Assembly. Li Do knew this was a ticking time bomb. With pro-gun and anti-gun factions in one place, a bloodbath was inevitable. He raced to the scene and was soon contacted by Moonback. The two of them met in a nearby building, with Moonback surrounded by dozens of mercenaries and Li Do, still recovering from his wounds, hobbling on crutches. Moonback, ever the manipulator, offered Li Do a partnership. He pointed out their shared past. Both of them were abandoned as children, both scarred by tragedy. Moonback wasn't completely evil. He just wanted to empower the weak and give them the means to seek justice for themselves. He believed that with a gun, the choice to pull the trigger was a personal one. But for Li Do, there was no gray area. Moonback wasn't a hero. He was just a man blinded by his own need for revenge. Convinced he couldn't talk, Li Do, out of his mission, Moonback immediately put his final plan into action. He drove a truck full of rifles to the protest, throwing the doors open and letting the protesters go wild. Li Do, seeing the chaos, raced to stop the truck, but Moonback's mercenaries were waiting for him. Even with his wounds, Lee Do took them all down. But he was too late. The protesters, now armed and terrified of the police and military, had already started a chaotic gunfight. It was a stark reality check. A gun wasn't a symbol of hope, as Moonback had claimed, but a symbol of fear. As the chaos turned for the worst, Moonback showed up with a smoke grenade, setting the stage for the protesters to shoot blindly. At that moment, Moonback himself was shot by a stray bullet, yet he didn't budge. He had reached his ambition to send terror to the country that had abandoned him, a final resolve he had dreamed of. In the middle of the carnage, Lee Do saw a little boy crying, whose parents had been shot dead. He raced to the boy and held him close, protecting him from the bullets flying everywhere. The heroic act was caught on camera by one of the journalists, and as the footage was broadcast live, the public's opinion started to shift. The guns weren't making them safer. They were tearing them apart. After the shooting subsided, the government held a memorial for the victims and ordered everyone to turn in their guns. Meanwhile, the journalist who had filmed Lee Do earlier was given a promotion for his viral videos, but his new job as a manager was short-lived. On his very first day, a woman whose life had been ruined by a story he wrote shot him. Karma, it seemed, was real. As for Moonback, he was in a coma at the hospital, but Lee Do had saved him. He wanted to get to the bottom of the shadowy organization that Moonback worked for, but a hitman was sent by Moonback's boss, Jake, to finish him off. The scene was not shown, so his fate remained a mystery. In the end, Kyung-suk, who had been shot and was in a coma, woke up, and Lee Do, finally with a family, adopted the little boy he had saved, finding a flicker of hope in a world torn apart by violence.